Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind howled across the north like a beast that would never sleep. It swept through the white forests, over the frozen lakes, and down to the blackened ruins of Winterfell, carrying with it the bitter cry of ghosts. Snow whispered across the scorched stones, and where once banners of gray and white had flown proudly, now only tattered shreds of cloth fluttered, each one a memory of the house that had ruled these lands for 1,000 years. Among those drifting snows rode a lone woman. Her hood was drawn low, her cloak thick with frost, her horse weary but sure-footed. Her name was Lyanna Stark, though few in the north remembered her now. She had been a child when Winterfell fell to ruin, spirited away by her mother to a distant holdfast before the wars came raging. For many years she had lived among strangers, hiding her name and her blood, until one night, in the silence of a dream, she heard a voice calling her home. It was a voice she knew, though it belonged to no living soul. It was deep and distant, like the rumble of earth beneath the snows. "Return, child of the wolf." That was all it said. Yet when she woke, she found herself already saddling her horse beneath the pale dawn, heart pounding with a strange resolve. So began her journey northward, through lands ravaged by war, through villages haunted by hunger and fear, until at last, after many weary days, she saw the gray towers of her forebears rising through the mist. Winterfell stood broken. The great hall was a shell of charred stone. The godswood lay silent beneath a shroud of snow. Ravens circled overhead, croaking like mourners. Lyanna dismounted and walked the ruined courtyard in silence. Her boots crunched on frost and ash. Here, her uncle Ned had once walked, and Robb and little Arya, who had chased cats through these same halls. All gone now, scattered to war, to death, or to faraway lands. She passed the empty stables, the shattered smithy, the blackened tower where Theon Greyjoy's madness had begun. There were no sounds but the moan of wind through broken walls. And yet, as she crossed the yard, she felt eyes upon her, a weight, invisible yet certain. Winterfell was not empty, not truly. She moved toward the crypts, that ancient heart beneath the keep where the kings of winter slept in stone silence. The great iron door still stood, half buried in snow. With trembling hands she pulled it open, and the cold within swallowed her whole. Torchlight flickered along the carved faces of her ancestors, stern, proud, unyielding. Direwolves rested at their feet, forever guarding them. Lyanna walked among them, her breath misting in the air. "Uncle," she whispered to Ned's statue. "Father, all of you, I have come home." Something stirred in the dark, a faint rustle, like the sigh of old stone. Then a whisper, not from her lips, nor from any living mouth. It rose from the depths, soft as falling snow. "Winterfell remembers." She froze. The words seemed to come from below, deeper than the lowest tombs. She held her torch high, revealing a stair she had never seen before. Narrow, hewn from the rock itself, leading farther down. The air that rose from it was colder still, and tinged with something ancient. For a long while she stood, torn between fear and wonder. But the Starks had never been a family to shrink from the dark. So, gathering her courage, she descended. Step by step, the world above faded, and she felt as though she were walking into the bones of the earth, At the foot of the stair lay a sealed passage, blocked by a slab of stone engraved with dire wolf heads. Beneath them were strange markings she could not read, runes older than the first men. In the center was set a faintly glowing shard of blue crystal pulsing like a heartbeat. Lyanna reached toward it, and as her fingers brushed the cold surface, a sudden image flashed before her eyes. Winterfell burning, a shadowed figure standing where the heart tree once grew, whispering her name. She stumbled back, gasping, her torch shaking in her hand. The glow faded, but not before she heard a distant sound, a howl, deep and sorrowful, echoing from somewhere beyond the stone. It was answered, faintly, from the forests above. Then silence. Lyanna stood there for a long time, heart racing. She knew now that something beneath Winterfell was awake, something bound to her blood and to the fate of the North itself. Whatever it was, it had called her here for a reason. When she emerged once more into the courtyard, the sun had already set. The snow had thickened, erasing her tracks, and a pale moon hung above the ruins like a watchful eye. She wrapped her cloak tighter and whispered to the night, "I am Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, and I am home." Far away, unseen beyond the walls, a pair of eyes gleamed from the tree line, cold, cruel, and knowing. The bastard of Bolton was not fond of ghosts, but he had heard the whispers too. Soon, word would reach Ramsay that a Stark woman walked the ruins, and the game, once again, would begin in Winterfell. The dawn crept pale and thin across the north, painting the sky in washed-out hues of silver and frost. Snow fell softly, layering the ruins of Winterfell in a quiet shroud, as if the earth itself sought to bury what had once been great. In that silence, Lyanna Stark kindled a small fire within the crumbled remains of the great hall, its warmth too feeble to chase away the chill that clung to her bones. She sat alone beside the flames, wrapped in her gray cloak, listening to the wind sigh through the broken rafters. There had been no sleep that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw again the faint glow of the crystal, the whisper of Winterfell remembers, and the vision of fire sweeping through her home. She had grown up on tales of the old North, of the kings of winter, of shadows that walked beneath the earth. But such tales had always belonged to bedtime and stormlight, not to the waking world. Yet now, she had seen something that could not be denied. As the embers cracked softly, she whispered to herself, "If Winterfell remembers, then so must I." A faint sound stirred beyond the ruined walls, a crunch of snow, the breath of a horse. Lyanna doused her fire with a sweep of her cloak and rose silently. She reached for the dagger at her belt, its hilt wrapped in worn leather. Her heart beat steady, though she felt the prickling of danger in her blood. She had learned to move quietly during her years away, how to listen, how to vanish, how to fight if she must. Through the shattered window, she glimpsed movement. 3 riders crossing the yard, cloaked in Bolton red and black. Their torches burned bright against the snow, and behind them trailed a pair of lean hunting dogs. One of the riders dismounted, his laughter echoing through the empty halls. "Ghosts, my arse," he jeered. "Ramsay's gone soft, fearing stories. We'll find no ghost here, only rats." Another rider, broader in the shoulders, gave a low chuckle. "Then we'll smoke the rats out." Lyanna slipped into the shadows of the hall and moved silently toward the cellar door. She knew these men, Bolton hunters, cruel and heedless. They would tear apart the ruins if they found any sign of life. Her only path was downward, into the cold belly of Winterfell once more. The cellar opened into the crypts, and the air grew heavy with stone and memory. She lit no torch, moving instead by touch and memory, her boots whispering across the dust. The statues of her kin loomed like sentinels in the dark. Above, faintly, she heard the hunters' boots on the floorboards and the dogs baying at the scent. One bark echoed close, then another. She pressed herself against the wall, scarcely breathing. The sound of voices drifted down the stair. "Tracks here. Someone's been walking these halls." "Then we've found our ghost." The dogs came first, 2 gray hounds with eyes bright as coals. They bounded into the crypt, their snarls cutting the silence. Lyanna drew her dagger and stood still until they lunged. The first she met with a sharp thrust to the throat. The second she caught with her cloak, twisting until it fell silent at her feet. Her breath came quick, her hands trembling, but there was no time for mercy. The men above had heard. Steel boots clanged down the steps. Lyanna fled deeper, into the unseen stair she had found before. The faint shimmer of the rune-marked door glowed ahead, casting the faintest blue hue over the stone. She pressed her palms to it again, desperate. "Open," she whispered. This time, the light flared brighter. The carvings of dire wolves seemed to move, their eyes kindling with a ghostly sheen. The stone shuddered and began to part, revealing a passage beyond, narrow, descending into a faint blue glow. Without a moment's hesitation, she slipped through as the voices of the hunters reached the crypt. The stone sealed behind her with a low, grinding sound, and silence swallowed her whole. The air beyond was unlike anything she had ever felt. Cold, yes, but alive, humming faintly with power. Frost clung to the walls in swirling patterns like wolf fur. The tunnel sloped downward, winding deeper into the earth, until it opened into a vast cavern lit by the dim shimmer of crystals that grew like ice upon the walls. At its heart stood a pool of still water, black as glass. Lyanna approached, the echo of her footsteps lost in the stillness. The water seemed to shift faintly at her presence, and in its depths she saw her reflection, though not her own. The face that stared back bore her likeness, yet older, sterner, crowned in frost. "Who are you?" she whispered. The reflection's lips moved, and a faint voice filled the air, soft as falling snow. "I am what remains of the first blood, the wolf's heart that guarded Winterfell in ages before your line took its name. You are bound to me by birth and by loss." Lyanna's throat tightened. "Why have you called me here?" "The North is breaking," the voice murmured. "Men have forgotten their oaths, and blood runs like water over stone. Long ago, the heart of winter kept the North safe from the cold that walks beyond the wall. But it sleeps now, buried beneath sorrow and fire. You must waken it, or all that you love will fall to ash." The surface of the water rippled, and a shape began to rise, a shard of ice, clear as crystal, suspended in the air. Within it burned a faint light, white and cold. Lyanna reached out, and when her fingers touched it, the cavern trembled. The cold shot through her arm, flooding her body with sharp, biting pain, and then clarity. In an instant, she saw visions, armies marching through snow, wolves running beneath a storm-lit sky, and the flayed banners of Bolton burning. And among it all, a face. Ramsay's cruel grin, twisted in fury as Winterfell rose against him. The vision faded. The shard remained in her hand, its light dimming to a soft pulse. She felt its power deep in her veins, heavy and ancient. Then came another sound, far away, muffled through stone. The faint clang of iron, a curse shouted by men. The hunters had found the sealed door. It would not hold forever. Lyanna turned and fled the way she had come, the shard clutched tight against her chest. As she neared the surface, She heard the stone grind and voices echo in the crypt above. She moved swiftly, silent as the snow. When she reached the broken stair to the courtyard, she paused, drawing one final breath before stepping into the open air. The storm had thickened. Snow whirled fiercely now, cloaking the ruins in white. She pulled up her hood and vanished into the night, leaving no tracks behind. Behind her, Winterfell stood silent once more, but the faint light of the heart flickered deep beneath its stones, like a heartbeat awakening after long ages of sleep. And far off in the dark, at the dread fort, Ramsay Bolton stirred from his bed. His dogs had begun to howl. Snow swept over the wild hills like a tide, erasing every track, every whisper of what had passed through the night. Dawn was a pale ghost that morning, dim behind thick clouds, and the land lay hushed beneath its shroud. Lyanna rode northward, her horse pressing on through drifts that reached its knees, the cold stinging her face until her tears froze. Beneath her cloak, the shard of crystal pulsed faintly, its light hidden from sight, yet she could feel its rhythm against her heart, steady as a drum. She did not know what the heart of winter truly was, nor how she might awaken it as the spirit had spoken. But she knew one thing with the clarity of fire. Ramsay Bolton must not take it. By dusk, she reached the woods beyond the White Knife, where the trees grew close and dark, their boughs heavy with snow. She found a hollow beneath an old pine and made her camp there, feeding her horse with the last of her oats. The woods were still save for the groan of branches and the faint crackle of her fire. As she warmed her hands, she took the shard from its wrappings and held it close. It glowed faintly in the dimness, a light not of flame, but of frost. When she tilted it, shapes moved within, tiny currents like snow swirling in a storm. She felt a strange calm in its presence, though her thoughts were troubled. "How can a stone save the North?" she murmured aloud. The only answer was the whisper of wind, yet deep within her, she sensed something listening. That night, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she dreamed again of Winterfell, not as the ruin she had seen, but whole and proud, its towers gleaming with frost, its banners flying. She saw her kin gathered in the great hall, Lord Eddard by the hearth, Lady Catelyn beside him, Robb and Jon laughing as snow fell beyond the windows. For a moment, her heart ached with longing. Then the scene darkened. Fire swept through the hall, devouring all. She saw Ramsay's flayed men pulling down the direwolf banners, the walls collapsing in ash. But through the smoke, she saw another figure, herself, standing beside the heart tree, the shard held high as frost spread across the flames. A whisper echoed through the dream. "When blood meets frost, the wolf shall rise." She woke with a start, breath misting in the cold air. The fire had burned low, and her horse shifted uneasily, ears flicking toward the woods. Lyanna listened. The night was not silent now. Somewhere beyond the trees, a faint cry rose, half human, half beast. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. She doused the fire and crouched low, hand on her dagger. The hoofbeats drew nearer, slow and cautious, then halted. Through the trees she saw lantern light, 3, perhaps 4 riders. Their cloaks bore the flayed man of Bolton, their armor darkened with frost. Lyanna led her horse deeper into the trees, moving without sound until the riders' voices reached her. "Tracks end here," one said. "The bastard's hounds lost the scent, but Ramsay swore she's real." "She's a ghost," he says, another muttered. "A stark ghost with a blade of ice. I say it's wildling talk." "Doesn't matter," growled the leader. "If she's flesh, we'll find her, and if she's a ghost, we'll drag her to hell all the same." Their laughter was low and cruel. Lyanna felt a hot flare of rage, sharp as steel. Ghost or flesh, she would not be hunted like prey. She drew her bow, nocked an arrow, and waited. The leader turned his horse, scanning the woods. "Spread out," he ordered. "If you see..." The rest of his words were lost as Lyanna's arrow hissed through the trees and struck him in the throat. He fell soundlessly from his saddle, the snow muffling the impact. The others shouted, wheeling their horses, blades drawn. She loosed another arrow, striking one in the chest, and vanished into the shadows. The two survivors dismounted and pressed forward on foot, torches held high. Their firelight danced across the trees, casting wild shadows. One moved left, the other right. Lyanna circled behind, her breath steady. As the nearer man passed, she rose from behind a pine and drove her dagger beneath his ribs. The last turned at her movement and charged, sword raised, but before he could strike, the shard at her chest flared with blinding light. Frost raced along his blade, up his arm, and in a heartbeat he froze solid, eyes wide with terror. Lyanna staggered back, staring. The forest was silent again. The shard dimmed, as though the act had drained it. She dropped to one knee, trembling. Whatever power it held was not of mortal kind. When she finally rose, she buried the fallen men beneath snow and gathered their horses. She could not stay. Ramsay would send more once these failed to return. But now she had proof. The heart could defend itself, and her. By dawn, she was already riding west, toward the Wolfswood. She knew of one place where she might find answers. The Last Hearth, stronghold of House Umber, loyal once to her kin. If any still held true to the Starks, it would be there. The journey took 2 days through endless snow. She kept to the forests, sleeping little, her body weary but her spirit unbroken. Once, she saw a great white direwolf watching from a ridge, silent as snow. Its eyes, pale and knowing, met hers for a breath before it vanished into the pines. She felt it not as threat, but as blessing. When at last she reached the outer walls of the Last Hearth, night had fallen again. The torches burned dimly upon the battlements, and she saw fewer guards than there should have been. War and winter had worn the Umbers thin. She approached the gate on foot, her hood drawn low. "I seek Lord Umber," she called. For a long while, there was no answer. Then a gruff voice replied, "The Lord's dead. Speak your name, stranger, or be gone." Lyanna hesitated, then lifted her head. "My name is Lyanna Stark." A silence followed. Then the gate creaked open, slow and wary. A man in worn mail stood within, his beard thick with frost. His eyes widened when he saw her. "By the old gods," he murmured. "A Stark? We thought your line lost." "Not lost," she said, "only scattered." He bowed his head. "Then come in, my lady. You'll find few friends left in these lands, but the Umbers remember who they are." Lyanna stepped through the gate, and the weight of her journey seemed to lift, if only a little. Yet even as she crossed the threshold, she felt the shard at her breast stir once more. Its light, faint beneath her cloak, flickered as if in warning. For though she had found refuge within these walls, the storm gathering beyond was far from over. In the Dreadfort, Ramsay Bolton had received word of his fallen riders. His smile was thin as a blade. "So the wolf shows her teeth," he said softly. "Good, let her run. The hunt is best when the prey thinks it has a chance." And in the depths of Winterfell, unseen beneath stone and snow, something vast and ancient turned in its sleep. The great hall of the Last Hearth was dim and heavy with smoke. Shadows clung to the rafters, and the air smelled of pine resin and old ash. Men sat around the long table, their faces gaunt from hunger and cold, the fire in the hearth burning low. The Umbers had once been a proud house, boisterous, loud, and loyal to the Starks, but war and famine had stripped them to the bone. Lyanna stood before them, her gray cloak still crusted with snow, her hood thrown back. The firelight glinted off her dark hair and the steel in her eyes. Though she bore no crown nor banner, something in her stance commanded attention. The man who had met her at the gate sat at the table's head. His name was Harold Umber, younger brother to the great John who had fallen years before. His once broad frame was thinner now, but his voice still carried the weight of the North. "So it's true then," he said, studying her. "A Stark walks the earth again. We've had ghosts enough these past years, but you..." He shook his head slowly. "You've your father's look, though I can't say whose father that would be. Which of the Starks was yours?" "My father was Cregan Stark," she said. "Ned's cousin. He lived beyond White Harbor until the wars took him. I was hidden when the fighting began." The hall murmured at her words. A few men crossed themselves in the old way, touching the hafts of their axes. Harold leaned forward. "And now you ride alone through Bolton lands? Why?" Lyanna met his gaze steadily. "Because Winterfell is not dead, no matter who sits its hall. I have seen what lies beneath it. Old power, older than the Boltons, older even than the Starks. Ramsay seeks to claim the North through fear, but I will not let him. I mean to take back my home." A grim laugh broke from one of the men. "You and what army, girl?" The hall rumbled with uneasy amusement, but Harold raised his hand for silence. He studied her a moment longer, then said, "You speak with courage, but courage alone doesn't win back castles. The Boltons have the Dreadfort, the Freys at their side, and men enough to scour these woods clean. What makes you think you can face them?" Lyanna hesitated. The shard of ice at her breast pulsed faintly, unseen beneath her cloak. She could not speak of its magic openly, not yet, but neither could she deny what she carried. "There are powers in the North that even Ramsay Bolton cannot command," she said quietly. "The old gods have not turned their faces from us. I've seen signs in Winterfell's depths, warnings and promises. If we stand together, the North can rise again." The hall fell silent. The men glanced to one another, uneasy but listening. Harold's eyes narrowed. "You sound like one of those woods witches who come down from the hills when the snows get too deep. Still..." He leaned back, thoughtful. "The Boltons' reach has grown long. We've lost good men to their hunts. If the Starks truly have returned, perhaps the North is not yet done with them." He rose and motioned her toward the fire. "You'll stay the night, Lady Stark. We'll speak again when the sun is up. Until then, eat, rest. You look like you've ridden through the very heart of winter." Lyanna inclined her head in gratitude. The men's suspicion lingered, but none challenged her further. She took her seat near the hearth, accepted a bowl of thin stew, and ate in silence. That night, she was given a small chamber at the top of the keep, its single window crusted with frost. She lay awake long after the fire had gone out, listening to the wind moan beyond the stones. Sleep came only fitfully, and when it did, she dreamed again. Of the crypts beneath Winterfell, of the sealed door and the whispering voices beyond. But this time, the dream changed. She saw the heart of winter glowing bright in her hands, its light spreading through the ruins, awakening the stone itself. She saw shapes moving in the snow, white wolves, great and silent, gathering around her, and beyond them, in the darkness, she saw Ramsay's face twist in fear. When she woke, the light of dawn was seeping pale through the window. For a moment she lay still, the echo of the dream lingering in her mind, like a promise. A knock sounded at her door. She rose, drew her cloak about her shoulders, and opened it to find Harold Umber waiting. His beard was rimed with frost, and his expression was grave. "Come," he said. "You'll want to see this." He led her through the keep to the courtyard, where men stood gathered around a blood-stained sledge. Upon it lay 3 corpses, Bolton men, their cloaks torn, their faces twisted in death. "They were found near the woods," Harold said. "Frozen through, though there wasn't a wound on them. Only this." He lifted a gloved hand and pointed to the frost that crusted their armor, an unnatural glassy sheen that did not melt even under the sun. Lyanna felt the shard at her breast grow cold. She turned her face away. "They came for me," she said softly, "and they met what followed me from Winterfell." The men murmured, crossing themselves again. One spat in fear. Harold studied her closely. "There's truth in what you said then. Something old walks with you." "Yes," she replied, "and it will not rest until the Boltons are gone." That night, Harold summoned his captains. Though his men were few, their hatred for Ramsay ran deep. One by one they pledged their axes to Lyanna's cause, not for gold nor glory, but for vengeance and the memory of the wolf. As the oaths were spoken, Lyanna felt a strange warmth stir in her chest. Not from fire, but from the shard itself, glowing faintly beneath her cloak. She thought of her family, of the honor they had carried like a banner even unto death, and she swore silently that she would see Winterfell free again or perish in the attempt. When the council ended, Harold approached her. "You've given my men a cause again," he said. "But know this, Ramsay Bolton will not sit idle. He'll come for you himself, and he'll bring horrors with him. If the north rises, blood will freeze on every road." Lyanna looked toward the dark window where snow still fell. "Then let it freeze," she said, "so long as it's Bolton blood that hardens first." Harold gave a grim smile. "You've a wolf's heart, Lady Stark. The old gods help us all." Beyond the walls, the wind howled through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf answered, and though Lyanna could not see it, far to the south the ravens had already taken flight toward the Dreadfort, bearing Ramsay Bolton the news that a Stark banner had been raised again in the north. In his hall of flayed men, Ramsay smiled his cruel smile and whispered to his dogs, "So the little ghost wants to play at war." He leaned close to the largest of them, its muzzle stained red. "Then let's bring her home, shall we?" And in the cold heart of Winterfell, deep beneath stone and ice, the ancient power stirred once more, its rhythm like the slow, patient beating of a wolf's heart. The north, long silent, was beginning to wake. The snows grew deeper with each passing day. What sunlight pierced the clouds was pale and thin, no warmth in it at all. Ravens gathered in dark flocks upon the frozen trees, their cries like omens. The north had entered its true season, when the world seemed half asleep, yet danger walked beneath the ice. Within the walls of the last hearth, Lady Lyanna Stark prepared for war. The Umbers had pledged what men they could muster, yet their numbers were meager, their arms worn and ill-kept. Most had the faces of men who had buried too many winters and too many suns. Still, when Lyanna walked among them, they straightened their backs and raised their heads. There was something in her, an echo of the old strength that had once bound the north together. Harold Umber watched her from the battlements. "They follow you," he said as she joined him. "They don't yet know why, but they feel it, like wolves scenting the storm." Lyanna gazed northward, where the world turned white and endless. "They follow because they must," she said softly. The Boltons have left them nothing else to believe in. She wore no jewels, no finery, only the gray cloak of her house and the direwolf brooch that once belonged to her father. Beneath the folds of her cloak, the shard of ice pulsed faintly against her heart. At times she could almost hear it whisper, not in words, but in a feeling, a promise of power and an urging to use it. That night, the captains gathered in the great hall to plan their next move. The room was filled with the scent of pine smoke and wet wool. Maps were spread across the long table, ink pots frozen half solid in the chill. Harold pointed to the lines drawn in charcoal. The Dreadfort lies here, east of the Weeping Water. Ramsay keeps most of his strength close to home, but his scouts range far. If we march straight, we'll be seen before we're halfway there. Lyanna studied the map. Then we won't march straight. We'll move through the Wolfswood, take the old hunter's trail that bends west of the Barrowlands. It's slow, but we'll be hidden. We strike from the dark, not the open road. A grizzled captain grunted. And when we reach Winterfell, you mean to storm it with 50 men? Lyanna met his doubt with a steady gaze. I mean to raise the wolf again. When the North hears a Stark has returned, others will come. The Manderleys of White Harbor, the Glovers of Deepwood Motte. They will not serve flayed men forever. The hall fell to murmurs. Hope was a dangerous thing in the North. It could warm the heart or break it. But in that moment, it stirred something long buried in them all. When the council ended, Harold caught her arm. You've the fire of your kin, he said, but I'll not see you burn it alone. If you march to Winterfell, I'll ride beside you. Lyanna clasped his forearm. Then the North still remembers. They rode at dawn 3 days later, 50 men beneath gray banners bearing the direwolf of House Stark. The wind cut like knives, the world nothing but white and shadow. For days they moved unseen through the woods, their horses weary but sure-footed. Each night they camped beneath the pines, the only warmth the glow of their small fires and the unspoken belief that they rode for more than vengeance. They rode for home. But even as they journeyed, danger crept closer. Ramsay Bolton's scouts had indeed seen the banners, and word had reached the Dreadfort. The bastard wasted no time. He sent a band of his best hunters northward, led by a man called Roderick Lorne, known for his cruelty and his cunning. It was on the 5th night that Lyanna's company met them. The snow fell thick and silent. The campfires had burned low when one of the sentries came stumbling into the clearing, his face white with fear. "They're upon us," he gasped. "Riders from the south." Lyanna was on her feet before the words had left his mouth. She snatched her sword, the shard at her chest flashing cold light as she did. "To arms!" The woods erupted into chaos. Shouts, the clash of steel, the howl of dogs. Ramsay's hunters moved like shadows, their arrows slicing through the dark. Lyanna's men fought fiercely, axes ringing, but they were outnumbered. Harold Umber bellowed orders, his great axe cleaving through a rider's helm. "To the lady, protect the Stark!" Lyanna moved through the fray like a storm. Her blade flashed silver, cutting through snow and flesh alike. Each time danger drew near, the shard flared brighter, as if alive, and where its light touched, frost spread along the ground. A hound lunged from the dark, jaws wide, and she turned, too slow. But before it struck, a blur of white fur leapt from the shadows. The dire wolf she had seen upon the ridge slammed into the beast, tearing it apart. Lyanna stared, breathless. The wolf stood before her, great as any she had heard of in the old songs, its eyes pale gold. It looked upon her, and in its gaze she felt recognition, not as beast to woman, but as kin to kin. Then it turned and bounded into the dark, leaving a trail of frost in its wake. By dawn, the hunters lay dead or fled. The ground was strewn with broken shields and blood frozen black upon the snow. Many of Lyanna's men had fallen, but the rest stood victorious. Harold limped toward her, his face smeared with soot. "The gods were with us," he said hoarsely, and something more, by the look of it. He nodded toward the place where the frost had spread in strange, curling patterns, like runes carved by the wind itself. Lyanna wiped her blade and sheathed it. "The gods are awake," she said quietly. "They remember." They buried their dead beneath cairns of stone and snow, marking each with a branch from the weirwood Harold carried from his hall. Before they rode again, Lyanna knelt beside the graves and pressed her hand to the earth. The shard's light flickered softly, as though answering her grief. That night, as the company camped beside a frozen stream, Lyanna walked alone beyond the circle of firelight. The direwolf appeared again, silent as the snow. It watched her from the shadows, its breath misting in the air. She took a slow step forward. "You are of my house," she whispered. "You came when I called, though I did not know I was calling." The wolf tilted its head, and for an instant she thought she saw another face in its eyes, her Uncle Ned, solemn and proud, the faintest ghost of a smile upon his lips. Then the vision faded, and the wolf turned away, disappearing into the trees. When Lyanna returned to camp, she felt the weight of destiny upon her shoulders, heavy as armor. The road to Winterfell stretched before her like a white grave, and yet she knew she would not turn back. For in the heart of that ruined castle lay the truth of her blood, and the power that would decide the fate of the North. Far to the south, in the Dreadfort, Ramsay Bolton listened to the report of his beaten scouts. His smile never reached his eyes. A wolf, they say? Then it's time the bastard hunted one for himself. And so he gathered his hounds, his riders, and his rage, and rode north into the snow, following the trail of blood and frost that led to the woman who bore the name Stark. The road to Winterfell wound through a land both sleeping and awake. The trees whispered under their burden of snow. The rivers lay sealed in glass, and the wind carried faint howls that might have been wolves, or the voices of the dead. The company marched in silence now, their faces set and grim. They had seen too much blood to be comforted by small victories. Lyanna rode at the front, her cloak streaming behind her like a banner of gray flame. Each breath rose in clouds about her hooded face. The shard of frostlight beneath her breastplate throbbed faintly, guiding her northward, as if it too longed for the place from which it had been taken. Harold Umber rode beside her, his beard stiff with frost. "The men are weary," he said. "We've been marching 4 days since the battle. They need rest, my lady." Lyanna's gaze did not waver from the white horizon. "I know. But if we stop, Ramsay will be upon us before dawn. His riders move faster than ours, and his hounds never tire." Harold grunted. "Then let us pray his hounds freeze before they scent us." They pressed on until dusk, when the land began to rise into low hills. The remains of an old watchtower stood there, its stones half buried in drifted snow. Lyanna raised her hand, and the column halted. "We make camp here," she ordered. "Light no fires. The wind will hide us." As the men unpacked their gear, Lyanna climbed the broken steps of the tower. From the top, she could see far across the north. The sky had deepened to violet, the first stars winking through the veil of cloud. In the far distance, like a shadow upon the horizon, she glimpsed the faint outline of Winterfell's walls. Her heart clenched at the sight. "Home," she whispered. though it was not the home she remembered. Below, the wind carried the low murmur of voices. Harold joined her, climbing the last of the steps with a grunt. He stood beside her, squinting toward the north. "So near, and yet it looks as far as the wall itself," he muttered. "Every step we take brings us closer to danger," Lyanna said, "but also to truth." He gave her a sidelong look. "You speak like a priest, not a warrior." "I am neither," she replied. "Only a Stark, and the North does not forget its own." They stood in silence a while longer until the wind shifted. Lyanna frowned. Beneath the steady sigh of snow came another sound, distant, faint, but growing. The ring of hooves. "Riders," she breathed. Harold's hand fell to his axe. "Boltons! Who else?" She turned sharply. "Rouse the men! We move!" But it was already too late. Out of the darkness came the sound of horns, low, mocking blasts that carried through the storm. Torches flickered below the hill, and the glint of steel caught the faint starlight. Ramsay Bolton had come. Lyanna's men formed ranks around the base of the tower, shields locking, spears braced in the snow. The enemy surrounded them in a slow, tightening ring. At their center rode Ramsay himself, his cloak blood red, his smile thin as a knife. "Well," he called out, his voice carrying through the storm. "The little wolf shows her teeth again. I was beginning to think you'd freeze before I found you." Lyanna stepped down from the tower, her boots crunching in the snow. She met his gaze across the dark. "You should have stayed in your kennel, Bolton. The North is no place for curs." Ramsay laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Ah, there's the Stark pride. I do so love when you people forget your place. But don't fret. When I take you back to Winterfell, I'll remind you of it." The men stirred, but Lyanna raised her hand for silence. The shard at her chest began to glow faintly beneath her cloak, answering her anger. The cold deepened around her, a breathless stillness falling over the field. "Winterfell does not belong to you," she said. "It never did, and tonight you'll learn why." Ramsay's grin widened. "Then come, my lady, teach me." He raised his hand, and his riders surged forward. The battle was joined. Steel rang upon steel, and the night exploded in chaos. Lyanna's line bent beneath the first charge, but held. Spears found flesh, and the snow ran red. Ramsay's men were many, but the Starks fought like wolves cornered in their den. Harold's axe rose and fell, cleaving through shields, while Lyanna moved through the fray like the storm itself, her blade flashing cold fire. At the height of the clash, Ramsay himself rode forward, cutting down man after man to reach her. Their eyes met across the melee, predator and prey, and the world seemed to narrow to that single heartbeat. He spurred his horse, bearing down upon her. Lyanna stood her ground, the shard flaring bright enough to blind. She lifted her sword, and when the blade met his, frost exploded outward in a blast of white. Ramsay's horse reared and screamed, shards of ice forming along its flanks. The beast toppled, throwing its rider into the snow. Lyanna advanced, her breath steady, her heart pounding like thunder. Ramsay scrambled to his feet, snarling, his blade flashing. They circled one another, the snow swirling around them like ash. "You think the North wants you back?" he hissed. "They'll kneel to whoever lives when this is done." "Then they'll kneel to me," she answered, and struck. Their swords met again, sparks flying. Ramsay was quick, vicious, but Lyanna's strength was more than mortal now. The cold flowed through her limbs, steadying her, guiding her. With a final cry, she drove her blade through his guard and sent him sprawling. He hit the ground hard, the snow blooming red beneath him. Lyanna raised her sword for the killing stroke, but Ramsay laughed. even bleeding, even beaten, he laughed. Do it, he gasped. Kill me. But know this, Winterfell burns from within. You think I came to stop you? I came to delay you. Her blood ran cold. What have you done? He grinned through bloodied teeth. My men, in your camp. Now. The cry of alarm came almost at once. Flames burst from the hilltop where her soldiers had slept, the fire leaping high against the storm. Screams followed. The ambush had been planned from the start. Lyanna turned, fury twisting her heart. Harold? She shouted, but her voice was lost in the chaos. She looked back once more. Ramsay was gone, vanished into the storm like a shadow. The battle broke apart. Her men scattered to save the wounded, to fight the fire. Lyanna stood amid the ruin, her cloak singed, her sword slick with blood. The shard pulsed wildly now, its light almost painful. She sank to her knees in the snow, pressing her palm to the ground. Old gods, she whispered, if ever you watched over the blood of the wolf, watch now. The wind shifted. The fire's roar dimmed, replaced by a deep, resounding crack from the hills beyond. Then came a howl, a great, terrible sound that rolled through the forest like thunder. The direwolf returned, white as the snow itself, leading a pack that seemed born of frost and night. They swept down upon the Bolton stragglers, tearing them apart. The storm rose with them, blinding, howling, alive. When it ended, silence fell. Only Lyanna remained standing, her sword buried in the snow. Around her lay the dead, both friend and foe. The wolves were gone, leaving no tracks behind. Harold found her at dawn, weary but alive. He looked upon the field of ice and ruin and crossed himself. The gods heard you, he said. Lyanna lifted her gaze to the pale horizon, where Winterfell waited beneath the rising sun. No, she said softly. They heard the north. And with what men remained, she turned her face toward home. The dawn after the battle came blood red, streaking the sky with fire. Smoke still curled from the ashes of the ruined camp, and the snow was black with soot. The moans of the wounded echoed faintly across the frost-hardened hills. Lyanna walked among them in silence, her cloak heavy with blood and ash. Her men rose when she passed, weary and hollow-eyed, yet they looked to her as if she were a flame that would not die. The wolves were gone. No track, no sound, no sign remained of their coming. Yet every man who had seen them swore that they were real. Some called them spirits of the old gods. Others whispered that the ghosts of the Stark line had returned to fight beside their kin. Lyanna did not speak of it. She felt the shard's faint pulse against her heart and knew the truth was older and stranger than either tale. Harold Umber leaned upon his axe, his arm bound in blood-stained linen. We lost 30 good men, he said, his voice thick with weariness. Half the horses as well. Bolton's hounds did their work, but so did we. He'll not forget this wound. Lyanna's gaze turned north, to where the land rose in pale ridges. Nor will I. We cannot march now, Harold said. The wounded can barely stand. If Ramsay turns back, he won't, she cut in. He'll crawl back to the Dread Fort to lick his wounds. He thinks we're broken, but we are not. Harold frowned. Then what would you have us do? Lyanna's eyes gleamed with the cold light of purpose. We go on. Winterfell lies but a day's ride ahead. If we fall now, the north will fall with us. But if we reach those walls, if we can awaken what sleeps beneath them, then we'll have more than swords to fight with. Harold studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Aye. Then to Winterfell, my lady. They buried their dead beneath mounds of snow and stone, the howling wind their only song. When at last the graves were sealed, Lyanna stood before them and spoke softly. Rest, sons of the north. Your blood will not freeze in vain. When the wolf howls again, you shall rise in memory." The surviving men knelt, heads bowed, and the oath of the North passed among them once more. The pack survives. By dusk, they were riding again, fewer now, yet their resolve burned brighter than the pale light of the sun. The world around them seemed to darken as they neared their goal. The air grew heavy, thick with frost and silence. Even the birds had fled these woods. And then, at the edge of the night, Winterfell rose before them. The castle stood like a ghost in the snow, its walls gray and lifeless, its towers half fallen, smoke drifting faintly from within. Yet even broken, it held the solemn majesty of ages. Lyanna felt her heart tighten as she looked upon it, home and tomb, fortress and memory. But it was not as she remembered. Strange lights flickered within the walls, and the gates stood half open, as though inviting her in, or daring her to enter. Harold reined his horse beside her. "No guards," he murmured. "No horns. This smells of a trap." "All of Ramsay's land smells of traps," she replied. "But Winterfell is ours. It always was." She spurred her horse forward. They crossed the bridge over the frozen moat and entered the courtyard. Snow lay thick upon the stones, broken only by the prints of boots, fresh, too fresh. Somewhere deep within the keep, a door slammed and a voice echoed faintly. A man's laughter, sharp and cruel. Lyanna dismounted, her sword drawn. "Spread out," she ordered. "Check every hall, every tower. Find him if he hides here." Her men moved through the ruins like shades, weapons ready. Lyanna turned toward the great hall. Its doors hung crooked, one torn from its hinges. Inside, the long tables were overturned, the hearth cold. Above the dais, the Stark banner had been replaced with the flayed man of Bolton. She tore it down with a single pull and let it fall into the ash. Beneath it lay the old direwolf standard, torn but unburned. Lyanna knelt, pressing her hand to it. "The wolf still watches," she whispered. A sudden noise broke the silence, steps behind her. She rose, sword raised. From the shadowed doorway came a figure she had not expected to see. A man in black, his cloak marked with the sigil of the Night's Watch. His beard was streaked with frost, his eyes wary but kind. "Stay your blade, my lady," he said. "I mean no harm." Lyanna hesitated. "Who are you?" "Jon Snow sent me," he said. "I am Torrhen Pike, sworn brother of the Watch. We heard rumors of a Stark woman marching through the north, and I was sent to learn the truth." At her cousin's name, Lyanna's heart leapt. "Jon lives?" "Aye, though barely. He stands at the wall still, fighting shadows in the snow. But he said this, 'Tell her the North remembers.'" Lyanna lowered her blade. For a moment, she could not speak. The fire that had burned in her since the first night of her journey now blazed brighter. "Then the blood of the wolf still runs true," she said. "Come, brother, you've found what you sought." Torrhen looked about the ruined hall. "And what do you seek here, my lady?" "An end," she said quietly, "and a beginning." They went together into the crypts, Harold and a handful of men following with torches. The air grew colder as they descended, the flames dimming, though the wind did not stir. The statues of the Stark kings watched them pass, their stone direwolves crouched at their feet. Lyanna led them to the sealed passage, the one she had found weeks before. The runes glimmered faintly as she approached, as if they recognized her blood. She placed her hand upon the stone. "Winterfell remembers," she said, and the door began to open. A breath of icy air swept out, chilling the torches. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls lined with veins of blue crystal. At its center stood an altar of ice, and upon it, the same sigil carved into the shard she bore, a dire wolf encircled by frost. Harold muttered a prayer under his breath. "By the gods." Lyanna stepped forward. "This is the heart," she said. "The power that once kept the North from falling into endless winter. It has slept too long." She drew the shard from her cloak. Its light pulsed in answer to the altar's glow. "If the old gods will it, we shall waken it again." Torrin touched her arm. "And if they will not, then we die as Starks should, defending our home." She placed the shard upon the altar. The light flared, blinding white. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a deep sound filled the air, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Frost spread across the floor in twisting patterns, the runes of the first men blazing bright. When the light faded, the shard was gone. In its place, the altar burned with cold fire, its glow steady and strong. Lyanna felt warmth flood her chest, not of heat, but of life, fierce and enduring. "It is done," she whispered. "Winterfell wakes." From far above came a cry, a horn, long and low, echoing across the snow. The men froze, listening. Ramsay Bolton had returned. Lyanna's eyes hardened. "Then let him come. Winterfell is ready." The storm outside rose anew, fierce and wild, and in the heart of the ancient castle, the wolf stirred from its long sleep. The horn's call faded into the storm, leaving behind a silence that seemed to breathe. The men looked to Lyanna, fear flickering in their eyes. Even Harold Umber's great hands tightened around the haft of his axe. The glow of the altar bathed them in pale blue light, shimmering upon their faces like ghost fire. Lyanna stood unmoving before the ice-carved sigil. Beneath her palm, the stone pulsed faintly, as though the very heart of Winterfell beat once more. For a moment, she could feel the strength of the North rising through her bones. The memory of every wolf that had run across this frozen land, every oath sworn beneath the heart tree, every drop of Stark blood spilled in defense of home. Then she heard it, the thunder of hooves above, the clang of steel on stone. Ramsay had come, and not alone. Lyanna turned swiftly to her companions. "The Boltons have reached the gates. We must hold them long enough for the heart's power to awaken." Harold's eyes flared. "We can't stand against a host, not with 20 men." "You won't stand alone," she said. "The gods are with us now." Before they could question her further, the ground shuddered. Dust rained from the vaulted ceiling, and a low rumble echoed from the depths. The frost along the walls began to move, spreading outward, twisting into shapes like the curling forms of wolves. Lyanna drew her sword. To the surface, Winterfell must see its true masters rise again. They climbed swiftly, torches guttering in the wind that howled through the stairwell. When they emerged into the courtyard, night had fallen fully. Torches blazed beyond the walls, hundreds of them, painting the snow red and gold. Ramsay Bolton's army had surrounded the castle. Upon a black horse sat Ramsay himself, his smile cutting across the dark like a blade. "I told you I'd bring you home, little wolf," he called. "And here we are, your precious Winterfell, ripe for the taking." Lyanna stepped forward, her sword gleaming pale in the cold light. "You stand on sacred ground, Bolton. Every stone beneath your boots remembers the blood of my kin. It will not suffer you much longer." He laughed, cruel and bright. "Is that so? Then let it remember this." He raised his hand. "Loose." A storm of arrows filled the air, black against the snow. Lyanna's men raised shields, but the volley tore through their ranks. Harold roared, rallying the survivors. "Inside the gates! Hold fast!" The Boltons advanced, scaling the ruined walls. Torches flared, Blades clashed. The night was filled with the screams of men and the howl of wind. Lyanna fought at the forefront, every movement sure and swift. The power within her had grown fierce, her strikes carrying the weight of the frost-bound magic she had awakened. Each time her sword met a foe, ice bloomed across their armor, freezing them where they stood. But still, the Boltons pressed forward. Ramsay himself leapt from his horse, his twin daggers flashing. He cut through the chaos toward her, laughter spilling from his lips like madness. "You can't kill what has no soul, girl," he hissed as their blades met. "I've flayed better Starks than you." Lyanna pushed him back, her breath steady despite the cold that gnawed at her bones. "You speak of flaying, but you've never faced a wolf with its fangs bared." Their duel circled the courtyard, sparks leaping from steel. Around them, men fell, the snow running red. The heat of battle rose like smoke, mingling with the scent of blood and frost. Then, from deep beneath the earth, a sound rose. A long, echoing howl, not of man nor beast, but of the castle itself. The walls trembled, and the ground cracked open along ancient seams. From those fissures burst streams of blue light that raced through the snow like veins of fire. Ramsay faltered, his eyes wide. "What devilry?" He never finished the thought. From the shadows of the broken gate came movement, silent, vast, and terrible. Shapes emerged from the swirling snow, wolves wrought of frost and shadow, their eyes pale as moonlight. They moved without sound, each step leaving ice in their wake. Lyanna lowered her sword. "The old gods have answered." The wolves fell upon the Bolton men, their jaws tearing through armor as though it were parchment. Screams echoed through the night as the host broke, scattering in terror. Ramsay's hounds turned upon one another, crazed by the scent of ancient power. Ramsay himself lunged at Lyanna in desperation, but she met him blade to blade. His daggers clashed against her sword, and for an instant the world seemed to hold its breath. Then her steel drove through his heart, the frost spreading from the wound, until his body turned as pale as the snow he had stained. He fell without a sound, the cruel smile frozen upon his lips. The battlefield went still. The wolves gathered around her, their forms fading like mist in the wind. The storm eased, the snow falling softer now, gentler. Harold stumbled toward her, his face streaked with blood. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lyanna looked down at Ramsay's lifeless form. "It is done," she said. "The North is free again." The men who remained lifted their voices, weary but triumphant. For the first time in many years, the cry that rose above Winterfell was not of fear or pain, but of victory. When dawn broke, pale and cold, the sky above the castle blushed gold. Lyanna stood upon the battlements, her cloak stirring in the wind. The land stretched out before her, vast and white, but no longer lifeless. The frost upon the stones shimmered faintly, alive with the pulse of the heart she had awakened. Harold joined her. "What now, my lady?" She watched the horizon. Now the North must heal. The Boltons are gone, but winter remains. We will rebuild, and when my cousin returns from the wall, he will find Winterfell waiting for him. Harold nodded, pride softening the weariness in his face. "The pack survives, then?" "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "The pack survives." Below them, the people of the North began to gather. Word had spread swiftly. A Stark had returned. The bastard of Bolton was dead, and Winterfell had been reclaimed. Lyanna descended to the courtyard, where the great weirwood stood untouched by time, its white branches spread wide, its red leaves whispering softly in the breeze. She knelt before it and pressed her hand to its roots. "Father," she murmured, "Mother, Rob, all of you who came before me, Winterfell lives again. Your daughter has kept the vow." For a moment the wind stilled. Then a single leaf drifted down, landing in her palm. It was warm to the touch. She rose, lifting her gaze to the sky. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow in light. And from somewhere far off came the call of wolves, strong, wild, and free. Lyanna Stark smiled, her breath misting in the golden air. "Winterfell remembers," she said, "and so will I." The wind answered with a whisper, carrying the words through the north until every frozen hill and quiet wood seemed to echo them in turn. The wolf has returned. The north remembers. Winterfell stood reborn beneath the pale sun. The snow that blanketed its towers gleamed like white steel, and the air was still, as though the land itself paused to listen. Smoke rose from the newly kindled hearths, and banners of gray and white fluttered once more from the battlements. Yet beneath the calm, the memory of blood lingered, faint as an old scar. It had been 3 days since Ramsay Bolton's fall. His body had been burned beyond the walls and buried beneath the ice, unmarked, unwept, unmourned. The wolves that had come from the storm were gone again, fading into the northern wilds. But their work had been done. The Boltons were broken, their cruelty scattered to the wind, and the name of Stark once again carried weight across the frozen realm. Lyanna stood upon the ramparts, her cloak snapping in the cold breeze. Her face was pale, her dark hair tangled from sleepless nights, yet her eyes burned steady. From here, she could see the white plains stretching to the horizon, where faint trails of riders marked the approach of those who had heard the news, the loyal houses of the north coming to swear their oaths anew. Harold Umber joined her, leaning heavily on his axe. The great man's beard was thick with frost, his wounds still fresh, but his spirit seemed younger than she had ever seen it. "You've woken the north, my lady," he said gruffly. "I didn't think I'd live to see the direwolf fly again over these walls." Lyanna gave a faint smile. "Nor did I think to see Winterfell whole again, but she endures as she always has." He looked out over the snow. "Aye, she endures, but winter still holds fast. Food is scarce, the villages scattered. The war left the people broken. They'll need a Stark's hand to guide them." "They'll have it," she said. "I will hold Winterfell until Jon returns. Then the north shall be whole again." Harold nodded. "You've the heart of your kin, Lady Lyanna. If Lord Eddard could see you now." She turned away, her gaze distant. "He sees. They all do." For a long while they stood in silence, the wind whispering between the stones. Then came the call from the gate, horns sounding low and deep. Lyanna straightened, her eyes narrowing. "Who comes?" she asked. A guard on the wall leaned out. "Riders from the south, my lady. Banners of White Harbor and Greenwood. They bear the sigils of House Manderley and House Glover." "Open the gates," she said. "Let them in. The north has long been divided. Now it must stand together." When the gates groaned wide, the first of the riders entered, a host of weary men wrapped in heavy furs, their banners snapping in the cold wind. At their head rode Lord Wyman Manderley, great and round as legend told, his cheeks red from the cold. Beside him rode Galbart Glover, stern and lean, his eyes sharp as the edge of winter steel. They dismounted in the courtyard, and when they saw the gray banner raised high above the hall, they went to one knee before Lyanna. "Lady Stark," said Manderley, his voice deep as a drum, "the north remembers. We come to serve." Lyanna descended the steps to stand before them. "Winterfell welcomes her sons home," she said. "Rise, my lords. You are not my subjects. You are my kin. The North stands together now, or it falls forever." They rose, and for the first time in many long years, the courtyard of Winterfell echoed not with sorrow, but with the sound of voices joined in oath. That night, the great hall blazed with fire. The lords of the North feasted for the first time since the war had torn their lands apart. Though the fare was meager, salted venison, stale bread, and thin ale, it tasted like victory. The hall rang with old songs, rough but heartfelt, of wolves and winter kings, and battles won long ago. Lyanna sat at the high table, her hands clasped before her. She listened but spoke little, her mind turning to the task ahead. Peace, she knew, was as perilous as war. Harold leaned toward her. "The men need this," he said. "Let them drink. Let them remember what it means to be of the North." She nodded. "Tomorrow we will speak of rebuilding, of the villages lost, the families broken. But tonight," her eyes softened, "tonight let them sing." Hours passed before she slipped away, seeking the quiet of the godswood. The snow lay deep there, the heart tree's red leaves rustling softly against the still air. The moon shone upon the carved face, its eyes dark and knowing. Lyanna knelt before it, resting her hand upon the cold roots. "I have done what you asked," she whispered. "Winterfell is free. The North lives again. But the world beyond our walls is still in darkness. The shadows grow in the far north. Jon will face them soon, and I cannot help him." The wind sighed through the branches, carrying the faint scent of sap and snow. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard a whisper, soft, distant, yet familiar. "You are not alone." A figure stepped from the edge of the trees. It was Torrhen Pike of the Night's Watch, his black cloak blending with the shadows. "Forgive me, my lady," he said. "I did not mean to intrude." "You came seeking news from the wall," she said. He nodded gravely. "Aye, ravens have come. The dead stir again beyond the wall. The White Walkers move, and the Night's Watch is hard-pressed. Jon Snow leads the defense, but his strength dwindles. He needs aid." Lyanna rose slowly, her breath misting in the moonlight. "Then Winterfell will answer. The North does not turn its back on its own." Harold's voice came from behind them. "You'd march beyond the wall, after all that's passed?" "I will not sit idle while my kin face the darkness," she said. "Winterfell was built to guard the realm of men. That duty does not end with me." Harold shook his head. "The men are weary, my lady. The war with the Boltons near broke them." "I know," she said, "but I will go, whether they follow or not." The old warrior looked at her for a long moment, then gave a weary laugh. "7 hells, you've the stubbornness of your house. Very well then, if the lady rides, so rides the Umbers." Torrhen bowed low. "The Watch will be glad of your aid. Winter gathers its strength, and so must we." Lyanna turned back to the heart tree. "The North remembers," she murmured again, "and the dead shall remember us." When morning came, she stood upon the battlements once more. The banners of the North snapped in the icy wind, and the fires of Winterfell burned bright. Below, men gathered in the yard, those who had chosen to follow her beyond the wall. Not many, but enough. Harold was among them, his great axe slung across his back. Torrhen waited at her side, silent and watchful. Lyanna's gaze swept across her people. "The Boltons sought to chain the North in fear," she said, her voice carrying across the cold air. "But we have shown them that the wolf's heart cannot be bound. Now a greater shadow rises, one that threatens all the realms of men. We will face it, as our ancestors did, with courage, with faith, and with fire in our souls." A murmur rose among the crowd, swelling into a cheer. The sound rolled across the castle, echoing through the walls like thunder. Lyanna mounted her horse, the gray mare she had ridden from the start of her journey. The wind caught her cloak, the direwolf sigil gleaming silver in the light. She looked once more upon Winterfell, the towers standing proud, the banners flying, the people watching her in silence. Then she turned her face northward. "Come," she said, "the wall awaits." And so, beneath a sky of iron and snow, the last of the Stark women rode into legend, her banner streaming behind her like the breath of winter itself. The journey to the wall began beneath a bruised sky, heavy with snow. The wind blew cold from the north, sharp and wild, tugging at cloaks and banners. The company that rode with Lyanna Stark was small, no more than 100 riders, but their spirits burned fierce as fire. They carried no fine armor or gilded steel, only the iron resolve of the north and the memory of wolves that would not die. For 7 days they rode through the frozen woods and open tundra, where the silence of winter seemed to stretch without end. The snow fell thicker as they climbed, blanketing the world in white. Lyanna rode at their head, her cloak flaring like a banner of storm gray, her eyes set upon the horizon. At night, they made camp beneath the stars, their fires small and hidden. The men spoke little, their voices hushed as though afraid to wake the sleeping gods beneath the ice. Harold Umber's booming laughter was gone. Even he spoke only in low murmurs now. Once, as Lyanna kept watch beside the dying fire, she saw the direwolf again. It stood upon a ridge above the camp, its fur glowing faintly in the moonlight. For a moment, she thought to rise and go to it, but it turned and vanished into the dark, leaving only the whisper of its howl carried upon the wind. On the 8th day, they reached the edge of the world, the wall itself. It loomed before them, vast and cold, stretching into the clouds like a mountain of blue glass. The sight of it stole the breath from every man. Harold crossed himself in the old way. "By the gods," he murmured, "it's like standing before the sky turned to stone." Lyanna gazed upward, awe and unease warring within her. "This is the last defense of the realm," she said softly, "and beyond it, the darkness gathers." Torrin Pike rode ahead, hailing the black-cloaked guards upon the battlements. Moments later, the great gate of Castle Black groaned open, and the riders passed through into the shadowed courtyard. The men of the Night's Watch came forth to meet them, faces gaunt, eyes hollow, their numbers too few for the task that lay before them. Their Lord Commander had changed, but his memory lingered. Jon Snow, the bastard who had risen to lead them, now gone beyond the wall and not returned. The acting commander, a scarred veteran named Harl Tollett, greeted Lyanna with a weary bow. "You ride under the wolf banner," he said. "That's heartening to see, but you'll find little warmth here, my lady. The cold's been biting deep, and the dead don't sleep as they should." Lyanna dismounted, her boots crunching on the frozen earth. Then it's time we reminded them what it means to wake the North. Tollett studied her, uncertain whether to laugh or bow again. "You speak like your cousin once did. He rode north of the wall 3 days past, chasing whispers and shadows. We've had no word since." Lyanna's heart clenched. "Then that's where we'll go." He frowned. "It's death out there. You'll find nothing but snow and whites for company." She met his gaze. "Then I will speak to death in the language of the Starks." That night, the company rested within the black halls of the Watch. The fires burned low, casting long shadows against the stone. Lyanna walked the ramparts alone, her thoughts on Jon. She could almost hear his voice upon the wind, steady, kind, unyielding. "The North remembers," it seemed to whisper. By dawn, the decision was made. She would lead a small band beyond the wall to search for him, Torrhen, Harold, and 20 men who would follow her into the grave if she asked it. The rest would remain behind to guard the wall. When they passed through the great gate, the wind struck them like a living thing. The land beyond was a white wilderness, endless and silent. The wall's shadow fell long across the snow, and before them stretched a plain of ice that shimmered faintly in the pale sun. They rode for hours without sight of life. No birds, no beasts, only the crunch of hooves and the whisper of wind. Then, as the day waned, they found signs of battle. Burned wagons, broken blades, blackened bones half buried in the frost. Harold dismounted, kneeling beside a corpse. "These were of the Watch," he said grimly. "Slain and left for the crows." Lyanna's hand tightened upon her reins. "The dead do not rest here," she said. "They are waiting." As if in answer, the wind shifted, and the snow began to move. Shapes rose slowly from the drifts, pale, silent, their eyes glowing faintly blue. The dead had come. "Form ranks!" Harold roared, raising his axe. The Northmen closed ranks around Lyanna as the Whites advanced. Their movements were stiff, unnatural, yet swift as a storm. The clash came like thunder. Steel against frozen flesh, screams torn from living throats. Lyanna fought with a fury that burned against the cold. Her blade sang through the air, each strike felling an enemy that would not die. The shard at her breast flared with light, casting a cold brilliance that turned the Whites to frost and dust. Yet for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. "They're endless," Torrhen shouted. "We can't hold." Lyanna looked to the north, where a faint glow flickered beyond the snow. Green fire, distant but growing. "There," she cried. "To the flame! Ride!" They broke through the horde, cutting a path toward the light. The Whites followed, shrieking, their voices like knives in the air. The riders spurred their horses, racing across the plain until the snow opened into a vast hollow. At its center burned a campfire, and beside it stood a lone figure in black, sword drawn, its blade glowing with ghostly light. "Jon!" Lyanna gasped. He turned at her voice, his face pale beneath the grime and frost. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Lyanna!" She slid from her horse, running to him. "You're alive!" "Barely," he said, his voice hoarse. "The dead came upon us in the night, the rest of my men gone." Before she could answer, the shrieks rose again. The Whites were upon them, closing in from every side. Jon raised his blade, the sword of dragon glass that shone like a shard of dawn. "There's no running now. We end it here." Lyanna drew her own sword. The frostlight within her flared in answer to his. Together they stood back to back as the horde descended. Steel and ice met in a fury of light and shadow. Harold and Torrhen fought beside them, cutting down foe after foe, but the tide did not break. Then, through the chaos, a new sound pierced the air, a horn, deep and terrible. The Whites froze. From the far edge of the plain came a figure tall and cold as death itself, its armor rimed with frost, its eyes burning blue. A white walker. Jon's grip tightened on his sword. "The true enemy," he murmured. Lyanna felt the shard at her breast burn cold and bright. The ancient power she had awakened stirred within her, vast and wordless. The ice beneath her feet cracked, glowing faintly with veins of blue. "Stand with me," she said. "The heart of winter beats here too." The walker raised its blade, a long, thin sword that glimmered like frozen starlight, It struck, and Jon met the blow with his own. Sparks of frost and fire exploded into the air. Lyanna moved beside him, her sword shining with the light of the north. Together they pressed forward, their blades singing in unison, the storm howling around them. When their swords crossed for the last time, Lyanna drove her blade through the creature's chest. The shard at her heart flared once, then shattered. The walker screamed, a sound that split the sky. The wights collapsed as if cut from their strings, falling silent in the snow. The light of the heart blazed across the plain, and for a moment all was still. Jon caught her as she fell to her knees, the cold spreading through her limbs. "Lyanna." She smiled faintly, her breath a mist of frost. "The North remembers, Jon. Winterfell lives. Because of you now." "No," he said fiercely. But she shook her head. "Keep the North safe," she whispered, "for all of us." Her hand slipped from his, and the frostlight faded from her eyes. When the storm cleared, only the sound of the wind remained. The field was empty, save for Jon Snow, kneeling beside his cousin, and the faint shimmer of dawn breaking across the frozen world. And though the dead had fallen silent, the whisper of the old gods seemed to echo through the air. The wolf has given her life to wake the North. The fire and frost are one. The storm passed, leaving only silence and the soft whisper of falling snow. The dawn that followed was pale and sorrowful, the kind of light that seemed too fragile for such a world. Jon Snow knelt in that stillness, his black cloak heavy with frost, his hands resting upon Lyanna Stark's still form. Her face, calm and cold, seemed carved from the same marble as the statues in Winterfell's crypts. The others stood behind him, grim and wordless. Harold Umber's beard was frozen stiff, his eyes red from grief. Torrhen Pike crossed himself, murmuring a prayer in the old tongue. None dared to speak loud enough to break the stillness, for the air itself felt sacred, heavy with power and loss. At last, Jon rose. The wind caught his hair, whipping it across his face, and for the first time in many years, he felt the weight of his blood in full. She had been the last of them, the last wolf of Winterfell to carry its name into the world, and now she had given her life to save it. He looked down at her sword, the steel rimed with frost, the light long faded from the runes etched upon its blade. With slow reverence, he lifted it and laid it across her breast. "You kept the promise," he said quietly. "Winterfell remembers, and so will I." The men built her pyre beneath the shadow of the wall, a mound of timber drawn from the haunted forest. They laid her upon it, cloaked in gray and white, her dire wolf brooch gleaming faintly in the new sun. When the fire took, it burned with a strange blue light, neither holy flame nor frost. The smoke rose straight into the sky, as though the gods themselves reached down to claim her. Jon watched until only ash remained. Then he turned his face to the wall and the endless wilds beyond. "We march north," he said. Harold frowned. "North? After what we've seen?" Jon's eyes were dark as night. "The dead will not sleep forever. The heart she awakened has slowed them, not destroyed them. If they rise again, I will not let her sacrifice be for nothing." The men looked to him then as they had once looked to Eddard Stark, quietly, with trust. And so they followed, leaving the ashes of Lyanna Stark to mingle with the snow. For days they rode through the wilderness, through forests of ice where no bird sang, through valleys silent as tombs. Each night the aurora burned faintly in the sky, ribbons of green and blue that rippled like banners of light. There were moments when Jon thought he saw her there, standing upon a hill or walking beside the fire, her hair streaming like dark silk, her eyes calm. But when he blinked, there was only snow. At last, they came to a frozen river that split the land in two. On its far side rose a range of black hills, and beyond those, the shadows of mountains, vast and cruel. There, the wind howled like a living thing. "This is the edge of the known world," Torrhen said softly. "Beyond this, even the maps give up." Jon dismounted, his breath misting in the cold. "The dead came from beyond the maps, so must we." They made camp beneath a stand of frost-bitten pines. The night was long and bitter. As Jon sat beside the fire, staring into the flames, Harold joined him. "She saved us all," the old warrior said. "That Stark woman. God, she was more than mortal at the end, like the stories the old ones told." Jon nodded. "She was the North itself, every hardship, every mercy, every grief." Harold poked at the fire with the tip of his axe. "And now you bear her burden." Jon said nothing. He only stared into the flames, where shadows twisted and danced like ghosts. In the small hours before dawn, a noise broke the stillness. A faint crack of ice, a whisper of movement. Jon was on his feet at once, drawing his sword. Its dragon-glass edge caught the light of the fire, glowing faintly. Shapes moved beyond the trees, pale and silent. But when they stepped into view, they were not wights. They were men, tall, gaunt, their faces painted with ash and soot. Free folk, what remained of them. Their leader stepped forward, a woman with hair white as bone and eyes like cold iron. "You're far from your wall, Crow," she said. Jon lowered his blade. "I'm not your enemy." "No," she said, "but death follows you all the same." Her gaze shifted to the horizon, where the faint shimmer of blue light still marked the place of the battle. "We saw what you did, the one who burned with frostfire." She woke the land. The ground trembles now. The cold grows deeper. "You've stirred something that's been sleeping too long." Jon's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "There's a power older than your wall, older than your kings," the woman said. "The heart she woke, it beats again, but every heartbeat calls to its shadow. The light has woken the dark." A chill ran through him, deeper than the cold of the air. "The White Walkers?" She shook her head. "Worse, the one they serve." Jon met her gaze. "Then show me where to find it." The wildling woman studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "You'll find what you seek in the Vale of Cold Winds, but pray you don't wake it." By morning, they were gone, vanishing into the mists as if they had never been. Jon's men were uneasy, but he gave the order to march. "If there's a greater darkness coming," he said, "we face it now, while we still can." The path north grew harsher. The wind bit like knives, the snow blinding, the air thin. The horses faltered, and men fell behind. Yet Jon pressed on, driven by a fire that would not dim. Each night, the light of the heart pulsed faintly upon the horizon, a ghostly beacon calling him forward. At last, after many days, they reached the vale, a hollow between black mountains, its floor covered in unbroken ice. The air there was utterly still, the silence complete. They made their way across the frozen plain, their breath the only sound. At the center stood a monolith of ice, tall as a tower, carved with runes older than man. Within it burned a faint blue glow, slow and steady like a heartbeat. Torrhen crossed himself. "The heart of winter," he whispered. "The old stories said it was only a myth." Jon stepped closer, his sword drawn. The light within the ice seemed to pulse faster as he neared. His breath came short, The cold pressed against his skin like a living thing. Then he heard it, a voice, faint but clear, echoing through the air. Blood of the wolf, fire of the frost. The storm is not ended. The light flared, blinding. The ground trembled. Cracks spread across the ice, racing outward in all directions. Harold shouted, "Jon, the ground!" But the roar of the breaking ice drowned him out. The monolith split open, releasing a torrent of wind and blinding light. And from within, that light came a figure, tall, cloaked in ice, its face hidden, its presence terrible. Jon raised his sword. "Show yourself!" The figure's voice was deep as the earth. "You bear her blood," it said. "The one who woke me. She gave her life to bind the cold, and now you unbind it." The wind howled, and the snow rose like a storm around them. Jon stood his ground. "If you are what she feared, then you will answer to me." The creature's eyes opened, two burning stars of blue. "Then come, Wolf of Winterfell, let us see if fire can stand against the heart of the cold." And as the storm swallowed the veil, Jon Snow lifted his sword, the light of the dragon glass burning bright against the darkness that rose to meet him. The storm that rose in the veil of cold winds was unlike any the North had ever known. It came with a sound like the cracking of the world itself, a wail of frozen earth and howling air. Snow spun in blinding spirals, lightning flickered pale through the clouds, and the ice beneath Jon Snow's boots groaned as though alive. The creature that had stepped from the broken monolith towered above him, its form half man, half nightmare. Its body gleamed like carved frost, its eyes burning with a light that was not flame but something older and crueler. When it spoke, the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, the voice of winter given flesh. "I am the first cold," it said, "the memory of death. I slept when your world was young. I dreamt of silence, and now you have woken me." Jon's men stood frozen in terror. Harold Umber's breath came fast, his knuckles white upon the haft of his axe. Torrin Pike made the sign of the old gods again and again, his lips moving soundlessly. Jon alone stood firm. He raised his sword, the pale blade of dragon glass shining with faint firelight. "If you are death," he said, "then you'll find I've stood against worse." The creature's mouth curved into something like a smile. "You carry her flame," it murmured, "the last ember of the wolf woman who dared the cold. But you are not her. You are only what remains." Its arm swept outward, and the storm obeyed. The wind slammed into them, throwing men from their feet. Harold roared and charged, swinging his axe in a great arc, but the blade met only air. The creature moved like smoke, and with a gesture, frost blossomed across the Umber's chest. He fell to his knees, frozen where he knelt, his eyes wide and still. "Harold!" Jon shouted, but his voice was drowned in the gale. The creature turned its gaze upon him. "The North remembers," it said mockingly, "but memory fades beneath the snow." Jon surged forward. The dragon glass sword met the creature's arm, and for the first time, it screamed. Blue fire flared where the blade struck, and shards of ice flew into the air. The storm recoiled, the snow drawing back as though in pain. Jon pressed his attack. "For the Starks!" he shouted. "For the living!" Each blow rang like thunder, each strike driving the monster backward. Yet with every wound, it seemed to knit itself whole again. The frost sealed, the cracks closed, and its laughter filled the wind. "You cannot kill what does not die," it said. "Your cousin thought she could bind me, but she only delayed the cold. You are her echo, nothing more." Jon fell to one knee, the strength draining from his arms. His breath came in ragged bursts, his limbs stiffening from the chill that crawled through his blood. The light of his sword flickered, fading. Then he heard it, a sound faint beneath the storm. A howl, low and mournful, rising from the distant hills. Another answered, and another, until the air trembled with the chorus. Wolves. The sound gave him strength. He rose again, his eyes burning with defiance. "She is not gone," he said. "She is the North, and the North stands." The wind shifted. The snow swirling around him began to glow faintly, silver and blue. From the shadows at the edge of the vale, shapes emerged. Great wolves of frost and spirit, their eyes bright as stars. They circled the battlefield, their howls shaking the sky. The creature faltered for the first time. "No," it hissed. "She gave her life." "She gave it to awaken them," Jon said. He lifted his sword, and the wolves surged forward. They leapt through the storm, their jaws tearing through the air itself. The creature struck back, its arms sweeping wide, sending waves of ice across the ground. But the wolves would not yield. They tore at its limbs, their forms blazing with ghostly fire. Jon joined them, driving his blade deep into the monster's chest. The dragon glass burned bright once more, and this time the light did not fade. It flared through the creature's body, bursting from every crack, every wound, until the valley itself glowed with fierce brilliance. The creature screamed, an endless sound that seemed to shake the mountains apart. Then it shattered, exploding into a storm of ice and light that scattered across the heavens. The wind died. The snow fell soft and slow. When the silence returned, Jon stood alone. The wolves were gone, melted into mist, though their presence lingered like a heartbeat in the cold air. He fell to his knees, his sword buried point first in the frozen ground. His breath came in gasps, his strength spent. Torrin came to him, trembling, his face pale as the snow. "Is it done?" Jon looked to where the monolith had stood. Nothing remained but a hollow crater, steaming faintly in the cold. "For now," he said, "but the cold doesn't die. It only sleeps." They buried Harold beneath a cairn of stone, his axe laid upon his chest. The rest of the men, those who still lived, stood in silence, their faces solemn. Jon said no words, for none were needed. The wind itself carried their prayer. The return to the wall was slow. The storm had scoured the land clean, leaving behind an eerie calm. They found no more whites, no sign of pursuit, only the endless snow and the northern lights burning faintly above. When at last the wall came into view, its vast shadow rising over the plains, the men of the watch met them at the gate. They listened to Jon's tale in silence, their faces grave. That night, Jon stood again upon the top of the wall. Below him, the world stretched vast and white, endless as the sea. He thought of Lyanna, of her courage, her fire, the quiet strength in her eyes. "She saved us all," Torrin said beside him. "Her and you." Jon shook his head. "No, she saved the North from forgetting what it was. I only followed where she led." He looked toward the horizon, where the faint light of dawn touched the frozen earth. For the first time, the sun rose without storm or shadow. "She gave everything," he said softly, "but she'll not fade into the snow. Not while the wolves still run, not while the North still remembers." He turned to descend, his cloak whipping in the wind. But as he reached the stair, he heard it again. The distant howl of wolves rising from the forest beyond the wall. It was not sorrowful this time, but strong, proud, and full of life. John smiled faintly, the sound echoing in his heart. And far to the south, in the halls of Winterfell, the heart tree stirred. Its red leaves trembled though no wind blew, and upon its pale bark, frost traced the shape of a wolf's head. The old gods were listening still, for Lyanna Stark, the ghost of Winterfell, had not vanished into death. She had become part of the North itself, its will, its winter, its unbroken heart. And in every snow that fell upon Winterfell's stones, in every whisper of wind that passed through the heart tree's leaves, her voice remained. The pack survives. The wolf endures. The North remembers. Winter eased its grasp upon the North, but only slightly. The winds no longer howled with malice. The snows fell gentle as ash, and the skies, though gray, carried faint streaks of dawn. In Winterfell, the fires burned again. The smell of smoke and bread filled the air, where once there had been only ruin and blood. Yet the peace that had come was fragile, as if the land itself still listened for footsteps in the dark. Jon Snow returned to Winterfell before spring's thaw. His black cloak was torn, his armor dented, his eyes hollowed by the sights he had seen beyond the wall. The men who rode with him were fewer than those who had set out, but they rode with heads held high, the wolf banners snapping in the wind. The people of Winterfell gathered as he entered the gates. They knelt, not because he asked it, but because they saw in him the shadow of what they had lost, a Stark come home once more. Torrhen Pike walked beside him, his cloak heavy with frost. The Watch had granted him leave, for the Night's Watch itself had changed. Fewer now, but bound not just by oath, but by survival. The old war between Crow and Wildling, lord and outcast, meant nothing when winter itself had taken up arms. Harold Umber's cairn stood in the Godswood, beneath the heart tree's red canopy. Jon went there first. He stood before the white bark, the carved face weeping sap like blood. The roots spread wide, curling around the stones that marked the fallen. "I brought her home," Jon said softly. "She rests with her own now." The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves. It might have been a sigh. He laid his hand upon the tree's trunk. The wood was cold, yet alive, as though something beneath it stirred in answer. "She woke the North," he murmured, "and I only followed her path." The whisper came faint but sure, a voice that might have been memory or dream. "You are the pack now. The North does not sleep." He bowed his head. "Then I will keep watch." That night, the great hall of Winterfell was filled once more with life. The surviving houses of the North had come, Manderly, Glover, Reed, and many more. Even the free folk had sent their chieftains, their strange furs and bone ornaments stark against the gray stone. Jon sat at the high table, though the seat felt too heavy for him. He had never sought to rule, yet the eyes of the North looked to him now with quiet expectation. Lord Wyman Manderly rose first, his great belly straining his belt. "The North remembers," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "We remember who freed Winterfell, who drove out the bastard and the Boltons. We remember the Stark blood that burns brighter than any lord's crown. My sword, my ships, and my house are yours, Jon Snow, Lord of Winterfell, King in the North." The words rang out like thunder. One by one, the others followed. Galbart Glover struck his fist to his chest. "King in the North!" The Reeds echoed it, their voices low and strange. Then the Umbers, their numbers few but their cries fierce. Even the free folk took up the chant, rough voices filling the air. "King in the North! King in the North!" Jon rose slowly. His gaze swept the hall, seeing not faces but ghosts. Robb, his brother, Lyanna, fierce and brave, Ned standing silent as ever. He lifted his hand for silence. "I am no king," he said. "The North needs no throne. What it needs is a keeper, one who will guard its heart, not rule its people. I will do that, for as long as the gods grant me breath. But this hall, these lands, they are not mine alone. They are yours, as they were hers." He turned toward the heart tree, visible through the great window, its branches glimmering red in the torchlight. Lyanna Stark gave her life for this land. She was no queen, no crowned ruler, only a daughter of Winterfell who would not yield to darkness. If the North must remember one name, let it be hers. The hall fell silent, and for a long moment none spoke. Then, slowly, Manderly raised his cup. "To Lady Lyanna, the ghost of Winterfell," he said. "May her spirit guard the North for all time." The hall echoed with the sound of steel upon stone as men raised their swords in salute. Outside, the wind shifted, soft and cold, carrying the faintest echo of a howl. The wolves had returned to the woods around Winterfell, as if drawn by some unseen call. In the days that followed, the North began to heal. Villages were rebuilt, trade resumed, and the people found their courage once more. The snows melted in the lower valleys, and shoots of green broke through the frost. But the memory of what had passed lingered in every whispered prayer, in every fire lit against the night. Jon spent his days among his people, helping to rebuild what war had taken. At dusk, he would walk alone through the godswood, the quiet broken only by the creak of branches and the murmur of the brook. Sometimes he thought he saw her there, a pale shadow moving among the roots, her dark hair stirring in the breeze. Once, as he stood beneath the heart tree, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. It was Torrhen Pike. "You speak to ghosts again," the Black brother said softly. Jon smiled faintly. "She listens. I feel it." Torrhen nodded. "Perhaps she does. The watch sends word. The cold is still stirring beyond the wall. We'll need eyes in the North again." Jon's gaze lifted to the gray sky. "Then I'll send them. Winterfell stands ready." He looked back at the heart tree, the red leaves glowing in the fading light. "She woke the North once," he said. "If the darkness rises again, it will find the wolves waiting." As they left the godswood, a soft snow began to fall, fine glittering flakes that caught the last of the sun. It was not the bitter snow of winter, but the first gentle touch of the season's end. That night, the moon hung full over Winterfell, bright as polished bone. In the stillness, the wolves howled again, their voices echoing from the hills and forests, wild and free. And those who listened swore they could hear another voice among them, clear and strong, like wind over frozen stone. The pack survives, the wolf endures, the North remembers. In that moment, Jon Snow knew she would never truly fade. Lyanna Stark would forever be the soul of Winterfell, the whisper in the storm, the guardian in the snow, the ghost who watched when all others slept. And as long as the old gods listened, as long as the wind carried the song of wolves across the white fields of the North, her spirit would walk those halls forever, keeping vigil for all who called it home. The first true spring in many years came to the North quietly. No horns announced its coming. No songs heralded its thaw. The snow simply began to melt, trickling from the eaves of Winterfell's towers, seeping into the dark earth of the godswood. Beneath the heart tree's crimson leaves, new shoots of green pressed through the frost, shy as waking children. Winterfell endured, as it always had. Its stones bore the memory of every battle, every sorrow, and every hope that had passed beneath its gray walls. Smoke rose once more from the great hall's chimneys, the clang of forges sounded through the yards, and laughter returned to the courtyards where silence had reigned. The north was healing, slowly but surely. Jon Snow walked the ramparts at dawn, his breath faint in the warming air. Below him, the castle stirred to life, the guards changing watch, the blacksmith's hammer beginning its morning rhythm, and the ravens calling from their tower. He paused, gazing out across the endless white fields, where patches of brown earth and stubborn grass began to show through the snow. A shadow passed behind him. Torrin Pike, his cloak of the night's watch billowing like a strip of storm cloud, joined him. "You watch the horizon every morning," he said quietly. Jon nodded. Old habits die hard. "Still looking for her?" Jon's eyes narrowed, fixed upon the distant woods. "She's not gone. I feel her still. When the wind comes from the north, when the wolves howl at dusk, I hear her." Torrin said nothing for a moment. "The watch has had word," he said at last. "Strange lights beyond the wall. The dead lie quiet, yet the ice sings beneath their feet. The Lord Commander wishes to know if the king in the north will ride again, should the need arise." Jon smiled faintly. "Tell him the king in the north is dead, but the warden of Winterfell stands ready." He turned then and began to walk down from the wall, his boots echoing softly on the stone. "The north needs tending before the cold calls again," he said. "Let us build while we can. The dead will wait." In the weeks that followed, he did just that. Under his hand, Winterfell grew strong once more. The broken walls were mended, the farms of the outer lands replanted, the bridges cleared of snow. The great library, long left to ruin, was restored, its shelves filling again with parchment and lore. The lords of the north came often to council, and their talk turned from war to harvests, from vengeance to peace. Yet for all the warmth that returned to those halls, Jon could not forget the cold. It lived in his dreams. He saw Lyanna there often, standing in the snow with her dark hair blowing, the faintest smile upon her lips. She never spoke, but her eyes, gray and steady, told him all he needed to know. One evening, he rode alone to the barrow fields beyond the castle. The light of sunset lay across the land, soft and red, touching each mound with fire. At the edge of the fields stood a single cairn marked with the direwolf sigil. He dismounted and knelt beside it. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of thawing earth. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "You brought Winterfell home again. The people still speak your name." He closed his eyes. "When I was a boy, I thought the songs were only tales, that ghosts could not walk, that courage was just a word men used to sound brave. But I have seen your courage. I have felt your ghost in every heartbeat of this land." The air stirred. A soft voice, lighter than breath, seemed to answer. "Then keep it alive, Jon Snow. As long as the North remembers, so do I." He lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the sun slipped behind the hills. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. "Rest then," he said. "I'll keep watch." When he returned to Winterfell, the night had fallen. The great hall blazed with fire and music. The lords of the north feasted not in fear or grief, but in gratitude. Their children played by the hearths, the sound of their laughter mingling with the crackle of flame. At the high table, Jon raised his cup and looked around at the gathered faces, friends, kin, and strangers bound together by blood and loss and hope. "To the living," he said, "to the north." They drank deeply, and for a time it seemed as though even the ghosts smiled upon them. When the feast ended, Jon slipped away into the godswood. The moon was high, silvering the heart tree's red leaves until they shone like embers. He stood before it a long while, listening to the stillness. Then, with a small blade, he carved a single line into the bark just beneath the carved eyes. Lyanna Stark, the ghost of Winterfell, the North remembers. As he stepped back, a gust of wind swept through the branches. The leaves shivered, and for a heartbeat, the face in the tree seemed to soften, the eyes deep with knowing. He smiled faintly. "Good night, cousin," he murmured. "The pack endures." From somewhere far in the distance came the answering howl of wolves. It rolled across the night like a song, fierce and free, echoing from hill to hill until it faded into silence. Seasons turned. The snows melted and came again. The crops ripened and were reaped. The tale of Lyanna Stark spread through the north and beyond. The Stark woman who defied the bastard of Bolton, who woke the sleeping power beneath Winterfell and drove back the darkness. Some called her the Wolf Queen, others the Lady of Ice and Fire. In time, her story became legend, as all great truths must. Children of the North grew up hearing her name whispered beside their fires. When storms broke over the Dreadfort's ruins, they said it was her wrath. When wolves howled in the winter woods, they said she was calling to her kin. And when the first snow of the year fell upon Winterfell's walls, they said the ghost of Winterfell was walking once more. Jon grew older, his hair silvering like frost, yet he never left his post, never ceased his watch. He walked the ramparts at dawn as he had on that first morning of spring, his eyes turned north. Sometimes he thought he saw movement beyond the tree line, a flicker of gray fur, the shape of a woman in the mist. He never called out, for he knew she would not answer. The North did not speak in words, only in wind and silence. But when the wind blew strong from beyond the wall, carrying with it the wild scent of pine and snow, he would smile to himself and whisper the words that bound them all. The pack survives, the wolf endures, the North remembers. And far beneath the earth, deep in the crypts of Winterfell, the stone wolves guarding the tomb of Lyanna Stark seemed to lift their heads ever so slightly, as if to listen. For though years would pass, and kings would rise and fall, and winter would come again and again, her spirit would never fade. Lyanna Stark, the ghost of Winterfell, would forever be the heartbeat of the North, the whisper in the storm, the fire within the frost. And as long as there was snow upon the land, her watch would never end.